Hello, my dear sleepy listener. Tonight, we drift into the age of silk and shadow, into a world shaped by domes and delicate calligraphy, by royal whispers and clinking tea glasses echoing across tiled courtyards. This is the story of the Ottoman Court, its rise, its splendour, and its quiet departure from history's stage. From humble beginnings beneath a simple tent in Anatolia to the golden halls of Topkapı Palace, we will walk together through over 6 centuries of gentle power and fading empires. Before you drift away into peaceful slumber, please take a moment to like this video, leave a gentle comment about your favourite historical moment, and subscribe to keep these soothing tales coming your way. I'd love to know where you're listening from. What's your time zone? Dear dreamer now, dim the lights, settle in, and let these gentle whispers of history lull you into sleep. You awaken on the softly rustling step, under a sky lit only by stars and the faint flicker of a campfire. The scent of tanned leather, wild herbs, and cooking lamb drifts through the air. In the distance, horses nicker gently. You sit just outside a humble tent, stitched from coarse fabric and dusted with travel, its flap gently fluttering with the wind. Inside, Osman, the son of Ertuğrul, speaks softly with his companions. Their words are hushed but carry purpose. The year is somewhere near 1299. There is no formal declaration yet, no great throne or golden seal, only a vision, a seed planted in the soil of western Anatolia, where the Byzantine Empire flickers into decline in small beyliks, or principalities, vie for power. Osman is not yet a sultan in name, but his followers have begun to whisper it. Ghazi warrior for the faith, leader, builder of something new. The stars overhead seem to listen. You walk among the men and women of his tribe. They move with quiet assurance, their belongings minimal, their eyes sharp. Black tents dot the dry hills. Small flocks of sheep bleat softly nearby. A few elders sit in council, wrapped in thick cloaks, sharing bread and discussing border raids not with violence, but with strategy, as if each one were a chess piece carved from olive wood. Later that night, Osman recounts a dream. He tells of a great tree growing from his chest, its branches stretching across the known world. In the dream, a moon enters his heart. The elders nod solemnly. To them, this is no dream, it's a prophecy. And here is where it all begins. Not with blood, but with symbolism. Not in marble halls, but in dust and prayer. One quirky detail from these early days is Osman's marriage to Malhun Hatun, whose dowry may have included not only land but also the strategic support of her tribe. You picture it a wedding not of splendour but of tents, tambourines, and shared roasted goat, and maybe Osman's beard still catching bits of pine smoke. Still, historians debate whether Malhun was his only wife, or if the famed Rabia Bala Hatun was in fact his true companion and the mother of his heir, Orhan. The Ottoman chronicles were penned generations later, and the women's names, like smoke in the wind, drift uncertainly through time. As you move through the Ottoman camp, it feels more like a mobile court than a royal one. Authority comes not from columns and columns of scribes, but from loyalty earned face to face. There is something earthy, almost poetic in this beginning. The empire to be sleeps under stars just as you now do. No one here yet knows what's to come, how this small band will shape continents. Before you rest, you look once more toward Osman's tent. A flicker of gold reflects from a simple sword leaning against the fabric. The scent of fire, goat's milk, and hope lingers. You awaken to the scent of blossoming cherry trees and the clink of hammer against stone. The tents are gone now. In their place rises the city of Bursa, tucked into the foot of Mount Uludar, its domes peeking like turtle shells from between tiled rooftops. The year is around 1335, and you stand in the city that has become the first real capital of the Ottoman Empire. The court is still modest compared to those of older empires, but here the Ottomans begin to take root in stone. You walk slowly through the courtyards of a newly built complex mosque, kitchen, bathhouse, and school all nestled together in soft grey stone. You notice the sound of water, a trickle from a marble fountain shaped like a tulip. A boy stoops nearby, memorising verses from the Quran. A pair of doves perch on a tiled awning, cooing softly. This is the early court of Orhan, Osman's son, and though the empire is still young, you can feel the quiet stirrings of structure of rule and ritual settling into place. Orhan's decision to mint coins marks one of the first tangible signs of sovereignty. No longer a mere frontier warrior, he is now a sovereign ruler. Silver akshis clink in the palms of traders and taxmen. You stroll through the bustling market, the Çarşı, where silk traders from Persia haggle with Greek merchants. The scent of sumac, lamb stew, and beeswax candles fills the air. One merchant offers you a sample of something novel fermented grape syrup, served over snow collected from the mountain. It's sweet and surprising. A moment of Ottoman hospitality, tucked between ledgers and ledgers of tax scrolls. One curious innovation during Orhan's reign was the creation of a standing army paid in salaries, an early form of what would become the famous Janissary Corps. Imagine that soldiers no longer tied to land or plunder, but to paychecks. Some wore short jackets dyed with walnut husk. Others donned soft red boots. They trained with spears and shields in open courtyards, their movements both military and almost choreographed, like a slow dance of discipline. But there's something else on the minds of the court today, succession. Orhan's son, Murad, will soon take command, and whispers begin to stir about future campaigns. Historians still debate how power was truly transferred in these early decades, whether through formal ceremony or quiet nods in candlelit rooms. Ottoman succession was never predictable. It flowed like water, sometimes smooth, sometimes with dangerous undercurrents. Still, in Bursa, there is peace for now. You pause beside a calligrapher tracing the name of Allah in golden ink on blue vellum. He works in silence, his brush steady. Behind him, a tiled wall glows with cobalt and emerald glazes, tiny arabesques curling like leaves caught in the wind. Evening falls gently on the city. You notice oil lamps being lit one by one along the palace walls, their glow reflecting in the pools below. Servants move like shadows, preparing for a simple evening feast. Lentils, flatbread, a bit of yogurt. The court remains frugal, more spiritual and splendid, still close enough to remember hunger. As night draws in, you lie beneath a cypress tree outside the city walls. The wind carries the faint sound of a knee flute, melancholy and sweet. You trace the stars above, wondering if Osman once stared at these same constellations. The empire is still young, the court still modest, but the Ottomans have placed their first stone upon the earth, and it has not sunk. You awaken in the city of Edirne, once Adrianople, just as the morning sun spills across polished stone courtyards and golden domes. The capital has moved again, farther west now, closer to the edge of Europe. It is the mid-15th century, and Edirne thrums with the energy of a court both ambitious and refined. You step into its streets just as the dew still clings to the edges of rose petals in the palace gardens. There's coolness in the air, but the mood is warm, almost festive. The Ottomans, under Sultan Murad II, are no longer just Anatolian rulers. They are an empire in full stride. As you walk along the freshly swept corridors of the Edirne Palace, you hear the gentle scuff of slippers on marble, the rustle of embroidered silks, and the faint hum of verses recited by court poets in the inner garden. The court has begun to gather scholars, jurists, musicians, and artisans not merely to govern, but to elevate. Law, faith, and aesthetics now intermingle beneath carved wooden beams and painted ceilings. Sultan Murad himself is not in his throne room this morning. Instead, you find him outside, beneath a cypress tree in contemplative prayer. His reign is a complex dance marked by religious devotion and periods of self-imposed retirement, stepping away from rule only to be drawn back in by war. You catch a glimpse of his expression stern, yes, but with a flicker of weariness, as if ruling an empire were not conquest alone, but constant negotiation with fate, and fate has not been idle. The Ottoman army under Murad has seen triumphs and terrors, including the famous Battle of Varna in 1444. There, Murad crushed a crusading army, reaffirming Ottoman strength in Europe. Still, the memory of that blood-soaked battlefield lingers. You can almost feel it in the chill wind blowing off the Maritsa River. Murad's sword may be clean today, but history remembers what it has seen. Yet amid these heavy affairs, one curious human detail endures Murad's love of tulips. The flower, later associated with opulent gardens and sultanic excess, begins humbly here. You watch as a gardener carefully tends to a small patch of red bulbs, imported from the east, arranged in neat rows behind the palace. The blooms are unassuming but beloved, treated with a reverence usually reserved for scripture. Inside the palace kitchens, great copper pots simmer with stew and rice. A steward tastes a spoonful and nods, satisfied. The meal is for visiting ambassadors, including emissaries from Venice and Wallachia. You linger in the shadows as they converse in a blend of broken Turkish, Greek, and Latin, their gestures filling in the gaps where words fail. You think this court speaks in tongues, not just languages, but intentions, performances, masks. Some historians still wonder about the internal workings of the Edirne court. Were power and policy centralised under the Sultan, or shared more broadly with the advisory council, the Divan? The records are inconsistent, and the truth may lie somewhere in between, a fluid dynamic that changed with each ruler's temperament. Ottoman governance was not a blueprint but a living mosaic, always being rearranged. Later that evening, you sit in the palace's tiled music chamber, where performers play the oud and canon. The melodies are slow, almost drowsy. You notice the chamber's ceiling, painted in dark blues and golds, mimicking the night sky. It feels like sitting inside a lullaby. You lie back on a cushion, your eyes growing heavy. Outside, the city of Edirne sleeps, but the court pulses on thinking, writing, dreaming. The empire expands not just with swords, but with ink. You awaken to silence, not the kind of emptiness, but the breath-held stillness of a city waiting to become something else. It is May, 1453. You stand in Constantinople, where once mighty Byzantine walls now cast long, uneven shadows across streets lined with chipped mosaics and broken marble columns. The wind carries dust, the distant murmur of prayer and the heavy tread of approaching boots. You're here at the twilight of one world and the dawn of another. Sultan Mehmed II, barely 21 years old, has laid siege to the city for weeks. You pass Ottoman tents spread out across the fields like canvas waves, filled with the clatter of armour, the soft snort of resting horses, and the crackle of roasting meat. Yet within this encampment, the court already stirs, preparing not just to conquer, but to transform. You find yourself among court scribes writing letters in the shadow of the Theodosian walls, already drafting proclamations for a city not yet taken. They write carefully, as if the act of writing alone might make the conquest inevitable. One man leans over and whispers to you that Mehmed dreams not only of victory, but of Rome reborn. The Ottomans will not simply sack a city, they will inherit it. The siege reaches its peak on May 29th. You do not see blood. You see the opening of gates, the creak of old hinges, the slow advance of Mehmed's guards through the ruined archways. The Sultan enters the Hagia Sophia, a place of Christian worship for nearly 1,000 years, and pauses. He does not shout. He does not destroy. He simply lays a handful of earth on the altar and bows his head. Later, the Hagia Sophia is transformed into a mosque. Its Byzantine mosaics are gently plastered over, not out of malice, but reverence. The court architects marvel at the dome. You hear them debate whether any human hand could truly have raised it. Even Mehmed walks beneath it in silence. That day, you catch a curious moment. The young sultan is offered a bowl of pomegranate seeds. He takes one bite, then sets the bowl aside. Too bitter, he says. Perhaps a reflection, perhaps an omen, yet the bitter fades. Soon, Constantinople becomes Istanbul, not overnight, but steadily. The court moves in. You wander the halls of new pavilions constructed beside crumbling Byzantine foundations. Ottoman banners replace imperial ones, but many of the faces remain the same. Greek architects, Armenian goldsmiths, Balkan scholars, all are drawn into the gravity of the new empire. You find yourself in the early chambers of what will become Topkapı Palace. It is not yet grand, but already orderly. A simple wooden desk sits beside a window overlooking the Bosphorus. On it, plans for city gates, schools, soup kitchens, and gardens. The Sultan dreams not just in walls, but in roads and fountains. There is debate still today among historians about Mehmed's motivations. Was his conquest driven by religion, ambition, or a youthful hunger for greatness? The answer, like the city itself, is layered. Byzantium was never one thing, and neither is the man who claimed it. Outside the palace, you pass a group of children playing near the docks, tossing pebbles into the lapping water. Their laughter echoes against newly Ottoman walls. You smile, noticing one of them wears a hat far too large, perhaps pretending to be the Sultan himself. You return to the palace just as evening falls. Lanterns sway in the warm breeze, their light flickering on newly tiled courtyards. Mehmed sits beneath a plane tree, speaking softly with his advisors. He is not yet called the Conqueror, but that title hangs in the air like the scent of rose oil drifting from the nearby gardens. You breathe deeply. The Byzantines are gone. The Ottomans remain. Yet in the silence of the city, you hear both echoes layered upon echoes, and the court has found its permanent home. you awaken beneath a golden canopy embroidered with curling vines and verses of poetry stitched in silver thread. The air is heavy with rosewater and rule books. You are in the court of Suleiman the Magnificent, and the empire has reached its zenith. It is the mid-16th century, and Istanbul is no longer a city of transition. It is the capital of a civilization. You wander through the polished stone arcades of Topkapı Palace, now greatly expanded from its humble beginnings. Domed chambers curve overhead like upturned tulip bulbs. Courtyards unfold one after another, each quieter, more secretive, more sacred. You pass through the imperial gate and into the heart of authority itself. Today, Suleiman meets with his viziers in the Kubalta, the dome chamber, beneath a ceiling painted in celestial blue and gold. His voice is calm, deep, measured, never rushed, never flustered. He listens more than he speaks. The court is layered with order. Eunuchs move along the periphery in silence, scrolls tucked under their arms. Scholars recite new interpretations of the law, and scribes make careful corrections to the growing Ottoman legal code, the Kanuname. For all his conquests, Suleiman is just as proud of this, the crafting of secular law that complements religious rulings. He is not merely a warrior, he is a legislator. It is said that he rose before dawn to write poetry, and you notice a small slip of parchment tucked into his Sasha verse, addressed to Hurrem, his beloved consort, written in his own flowing hand. That is the Sultan's quieter self, revealed not on horseback, but in ink, and the court reflects that duality, pomp and poetry, sword and stanza. You step into the imperial council, where the Grand Vizier leads discussions while the Sultan listens secretly from a lattice above. Yes, Suleiman is there behind the gilded grille work, unseen. He does not interrupt, but he hears everything, a game of shadows and signals. Outside, a gardener carefully prunes a line of fig trees. The palace grounds are an empire in miniature, disciplined, cultivated, balanced between beauty and function. Later, you pass a calligrapher etching verses into a prayer scroll with a single horsehair brush. The brush must never falter. Each letter is a kind of devotion. When he pauses, it is only to sip thick coffee, still a relatively new luxury in the court. He swears it sharpens his mind, though one scribe nearby rolls his eyes. You smile, empire or not. Some debates are eternal. A small joke makes its way through the servants' quarters. The Sultan conquered the world, but coffee conquered the court. Suleiman's conquests, however, are no joke. From Belgrade to Baghdad, from Rhodes to Yemen, the empire stretches further than ever before. And yet, his court is not overly gaudy. It is dignified, elegant, humming with precise etiquette and subtle manoeuvrings. But even here, historians debate. Was Suleiman's court truly a meritocracy? Or did the influence of palace favourites outweigh the titles on paper Hurrem Sultan herself? Once a concubine, now wields influence like a stateswoman. Was this an evolution of power or a quiet crisis in the Sultan's impartiality? The truth, as always, floats somewhere in between. You feel it in the architecture grand. Yes, but inward-looking. Each courtyard a filter, each threshold narrowing the circle of influence. The court draws itself inward, ever more refined. You pause at the library, its windows open to a shaded garden. A young boy studies there, his lesson whispered by a tutor with a walnut rod, not to punish, but to trace lines in the air. You watch the boy copy the names of ancient philosophers in Arabic script: Plato, Galen, Avicenna. Knowledge here is preserved, reinterpreted, and carried forward. At dusk, Suleiman retires to a terrace overlooking the Bosphorus. You stand not far behind. He sips sherbet made from violets. The horizon glows with burnt orange. Across the water, ships slide silently through evening mist. He says nothing, but his court, at this hour, needs no words. You sit cross-legged, eyes half closed. Around you, the palace breathes with confidence never loud, but absolute. The age of Suleiman is a garden, both literal and metaphorical, where law is a vine trained to grow with elegance, never wild. And tonight it blooms. You awaken in a chamber scented with rose oil and soft candle smoke, where the air hangs heavy with secrets and silk. This is the private world of Hürrem Sultan, the once captive girl from Ruthenia who became the most powerful woman in the Ottoman Empire. You are deep inside the harem, far beyond the outer courts, where men's voices seldom reach, and decisions are often whispered instead of decreed. The floors are covered in rich carpets, woven in konya and dyed in crimson and cobalt. Light filters through coloured glass, scattering a mosaic of soft hues across walls of Iznik tile. A parrot chirps once, then falls silent. The stillness is complete. Hürrem's influence radiates from her private quarters, where she pens letters in an elegant Ottoman script. You glance at a partially folded message on her desk, addressed to King Sigismund of Poland, written not just in Turkish, but also in Polish. She writes with ease, with diplomacy, and with unexpected warmth. The letter reads like a dance flirtation, suggestion, policy all wrapped together in poetic form. This, you realise, is what power looks like when it wears perfume instead of armour. You wander through the harem's inner halls. Contrary to rumour, this is no idle den of indulgence. It is a world of education, etiquette, and ambition. Young women study calligraphy, recite scripture, and learn the precise rituals of court. They are being groomed not for leisure but for influence. To share space with the Sultan, one must know more than beauty. One must master silence, observation, and the hidden meanings of a glance. Some wear simple silks, others wear elaborate gauze robes stitched with tiny rubies, but even the most richly dressed still walk quietly, barefoot on mosaic floors. Their hierarchy is strict, invisible, and constantly shifting. You catch one girl tracing a map of Anatolia in the steam on a bathhouse window. She sighs, then wipes it away. Her thoughts drift as far as her ambitions. One quirky artifact you see in the harem's quarters is a tiny game set carved from ivory and wood, a kind of chess, but with courtly figures' viziers, scribes, and concubines instead of knights and kings. The players giggle as they move their pieces. You wonder how many of them see themselves in the game. Outside the harem, rumours stir. The court debates Hürrem's growing influence. Some say she's bewitched the Sultan. Others insist she's a visionary, guiding Suleiman with sharper insight than any vizier. Historians today still debate the nature of her power. Was it truly unprecedented, or simply the first to be so well documented? No one can say for sure. What is certain is that she broke precedent by marrying Suleiman, becoming not just a consort, but his legal wife, a bold, controversial act that forever altered the nature of imperial marriage. Before her, consorts faded with dynasties. After her, they helped shape them You move now through the Queen Mother's quarters, Hürrem's eventual domain. Her letters continue to arrive from distant provinces. Her charities expand. Bathhouses, soup kitchens, mosques. Her name is etched into stone across the empire, each inscription in delicate calligraphy, each structure a gesture of permanence. In the quiet of the afternoon, Hürrem sits beneath a lattice window, embroidering a small cloth blue and gold thread on cream linen. She hums a tune from her homeland, something Slavic and soft, barely audible over the wind outside. In this moment, she is not a queen, nor a schemer, just a woman remembering where she came from. You watch her pause, then set the embroidery aside. She gazes toward the Bosphorus, expression unreadable. Perhaps she sees herself reflected in the currents, pulled from the farthest reaches of the world into the centre of its power, still drifting, still shaping every ripple. Night falls, and the lamps in the harem flicker one by one, casting long shadows on tile and silk. You find a quiet spot near a marble column and rest. The empire beyond these walls marches forward, but in here, history tiptoes, and you, for a moment, have walked with it. You awaken with the scent of wet plaster and sandalwood in the air, and above you looms the beginning of a dome unfinished, perfect in its geometry, poised between vision and reality. You are in the company of Mimar Sinan, the imperial architect, the master builder of Suleiman's court and beyond. His white beard is dusted with limestone, his fingers calloused from years of sculpting space into serenity. Today, you shadow him as he sketches lines in the sand with a twig, planning yet another marvel of arches, courtyards, and flowing water. Sinan began his life as a Christian boy from Anatolia, taken by the Devshirme levy and trained as a janissary engineer, but stone, not steel, became his weapon. His first military bridges and fortifications led to more graceful commissions, mosques, schools, aqueducts. Now, he builds not for war, but for beauty, for the soul of an empire. You stand with him on the scaffolding of the Shehzade Mosque, watching as the sun rises behind its central dome. He says little. His gestures speak more loudly than words. He measures shadow angles and wind patterns. He runs his hand along stone blocks as though listening to them. Nearby, a foreman offers you a lump of mortar to hold. It's still warm. You smell lime, clay, and the effort of 100 workers moving as one. Some sing as they carry bricks. Others pray softly before placing cornerstones. There's rhythm here, construction as devotion. You trail Sinan through Istanbul's neighbourhoods, each marked by a project of his Süleymaniye mosque, rising in noble harmony above the Golden Horn. Aqueducts stretching like ribcages across valleys, quiet tombs tucked into garden walls. Each space reflects not grandeur for its own sake, but balance, light, airflow, placement. He calls it breathing architecture. One curious moment stays with you. Sinan halts in front of a wall, frowns, and taps a marble slab with his knuckle. Too hollow, he mutters. The crew groans. They'll need to replace it, but they obey. Even the most minor flaw will not survive his eye. The court respects him. The sultans grant him vast resources, but he is no flatterer. He kneels not before the throne, but before geometry. To him, every arch is a verse, every courtyard a pause in prayer. And yet, you notice he always begins his plans with pencil sketches on old scraps of parchment. Even the greatest visions start as a few lines in the dust. Some historians debate the true scope of his work. Did he design all 300+ structures attributed to him, or did later pupils carry on under his name? The truth may rest somewhere in the stone, his signature often subtle, like an echo rather than a shout. You find yourself in the Suleimaniye complex's inner courtyard as dusk falls. The call to prayer rings out across the city, echoing between domes and rooftops, softened by distance. You sit on a low bench beside an elderly mason who tells you, every stone here has been placed to listen. The sky darkens. Oil lamps flicker on beneath porticos. The grand dome above glows faintly in moonlight, its silhouette balanced like a crown upon the city's brow. You close your eyes, sensing the weight of it all not heavy, but rooted. Mimar Sinan walks past you one last time, his pace steady, his plans tucked under his arm. He does not pause to admire his legacy. He merely nods, as if to say it is enough that it stands. And tonight, you sleep beneath the shelter of his silence. You awaken to the gentle sound of clinking cups and a wisp of bitter fragrance drifting through a sunlit courtyard. It is early morning in the imperial palace, and the court is already steeped in ritual. Not of politics or war, but of coffee, rich, dark, and recently arrived from the southern provinces. The brew has become more than a drink, it is a ceremony, a culture, a quiet revolution in porcelain cups. You sit beneath a carved wooden awning beside the court's kaveshibasha, the chief coffee steward. His robes are impeccable, his hands precise as he prepares the sultan's morning serving. Every motion measuring the grounds, tending to the embers, pouring from the copper, Sesvi is slow, deliberate, even sacred. The first sip, taken in silence, marks the court's day into motion. Today's gathering is not a state affair, but a social one. Viziers and scholars assemble in the Artsodasa's outer garden, sharing small sips and smaller secrets. One jokes that decisions made over coffee tend to outlast treaties drafted with ink. You notice how the placement of each cushion, the flicker of each incense coil, creates a mood of softness, conversations guided not by tension, but by tone. Nearby, a storyteller performs in hushed tones, reciting tales of distant lands, of birds that speak in riddles, and wise kings who consult their cats. You smile. The court may govern an empire, but it has time for wonder. This coffeehouse culture, though modest in appearance, is an engine of expression. Music, literature, ideas swirl here in silence. Some call it the quiet court, a place where a pause between sips carries as much weight as a written decree. You glance at the finely woven coffee napkin embroidered with a single tulip. One curious fact, these napkins are not merely decorative. Some are scented with rose or clove, folded in ritualistic shapes, and exchanged like playing cards among favoured courtiers. A few are even inscribed with riddles, soft puzzles shared between sips. In one corner, a group debates a new architectural project. In another, two women from the harem share a glance that means more than words. In this court of coffee, subtlety reigns. And yet, this setting is not without quiet tension. The growing popularity of coffee in the empire once stirred alarm. Early in the century, some religious scholars debated whether its stimulating effects were too worldly for devout Muslims. Was it a vice, a blessing, a bridge between wakefulness and contemplation? The argument reached even the palace gates, but was ultimately decided by the Sultan himself. Coffee, he ruled, was to be embraced, not merely tolerated. And so the court adopted it not just as a beverage, but as a symbol of refinement. You move now through the kitchen gardens, where cardamom, cloves, and cinnamon grow in small plots tended by elderly groundskeepers. One invites you to smell a crushed leaf. It's sharp, bright. You imagine it's steeped in a future brew, flavouring some ambassador's first impression of the empire. At the edge of the courtyard, you find an alcove where the Sultan sometimes listens to poetry in the afternoon. A cushion waits. A tray has been left with a small cup, still warm. You take a seat. You sip slowly. The empire feels paused, not stalled, not still, but suspended in thoughtful calm. Evening descends gently over Istanbul. You hear the faint clatter of dishes being cleared, the soft splash of water in marble basins, the turning of a page inside the library. Someone laughs low and sincere. The palace grows quiet again. You lie back beneath a fig tree and close your eyes. Somewhere nearby, another cup is being poured, another conversation begins, and in the court of coffee, the empire dreams in rich, earthy tones. You awaken behind a delicate lattice screen, the air thick with jasmine, sandalwood, and unspoken intention. You are deep within the harem of Topkapı Palace again, but this time not as an observer of Hurrem's rise. Now, the space around you is older, more structured, more ritualized. The court of women has become its own empire within an empire, humming with protocol, memory, and power hidden in plain sight. You tread softly across tiled floors, past fountains that never stop murmuring, past doors that never open without invitation. Everywhere you look, silence is sculpted into beauty. Even the architecture seems to lean inward, protective, secretive. This is the time of Kösem Sultan. She is not young and not to be underestimated. Once a concubine, then the favourite of Sultan Mehmed VI, she now guides the court as Valide Sultan Queen Mother. You find her seated beneath a painted dome, veiled, her fingers adorned with rings whose gems shimmer with messages unspoken. She does not raise her voice. She does not need to. You watch her receive a folded note written in a cipher only a handful can decode. A eunuch bows low, then disappears into the shadows. It is said Kösem can place or remove a vizier with a single word, that her alliances stretch beyond the harem into the council, the janissary barracks, even foreign embassies, but she also manages the internal court with the precision of a statesman. Girls are promoted or retired based on merit and tact. Lessons in Arabic, history, music, and manners are taught daily. One young girl recites a passage from the Quran, then curtsies, eyes cast down. Kösem nods once. Approval has been granted. You follow her into a marble-panelled bath where steam coils like silk. Several women surround her, not just attendants, but informants, advisors. She speaks softly of a grain shipment delay in Alexandria, and whether it's a mistake or sabotage. The harem is no idle cage. It is a network, a mechanism of empire, and with it come quirks. One little-known tradition, now fading, involves the gifting of embroidered slippers, each pair a message. A red slipper might indicate displeasure, green, unexpected favour. Kösem's collection is vast. Some say she can recall the origin of every pair. Historians still puzzle over the full extent of her political power. Did she orchestrate assassinations? Was she a peacemaker behind the throne or a puppet master pulling strings from behind a veil, letters burned, testimonies erased? Only fragments remain. What survives most clearly is her presence, calm, intelligent, unsentimental. You pause now at the harem schoolroom. the sons of concubines, potential sultans, study in silence. One small boy, no older than 5, stares at a globe and whispers the name of cities he's never seen. Vienna, Mecca, Delhi. A tutor reminds him gently that knowledge is the armour of rulers. The boy nods. Elsewhere in the harem, a musician plucks notes from a tambour. A lullaby, perhaps. You close your eyes and let the tune wrap around you like silk. You feel how this space holds history, breathes it through the perfume that clings to curtains, the worn edges of tiles, the low tread of slippered feet. As evening falls, Kösem lights a lamp herself. It is a small, deliberate act, her hands steady. Around her, shadows stretch across cushions and floor mosaics. The harem quiets not from fear, but rhythm. You rest in a corner of the Queen Mother's garden, where pomegranate trees lean toward the palace wall. A softer breeze carries the scent of saffron and night-blooming flowers. Somewhere above, a cat slinks across the rooftop, unseen but felt. Tonight, you do not dream of battlefields or court councils. You dream of veils, of letters passed in silence, of women who rule without being seen. And you sleep within an empire ruled by whispers. You awaken to the sound of boots on polished stone and the sharp rustle of robes measured, not hurried. The court has grown stiller, colder, more exact. This is the age of Köprülü Mehmed Pasha, and the Sultan's court no longer runs solely on ceremony and charm. It runs on reforms, ledgers, and the steady hand of a grand vizier unafraid to shake the pillars of palace comfort. You find yourself in the divan chamber early in the day. The viziers have already gathered, seated in a circle beneath a domed ceiling painted with gold vines. They glance at one another, waiting. Then he arrives, Mehmed Pasha, his beard white, his voice calm, his eyes like polished flint. He does not waste time with greetings. He speaks in short commands, the language of a man who has returned from the edge of a crumbling empire and intends to shore up its walls brick by brick. The court had grown soft. Corruption crept into its corners like dust. It was Mehmed Pasha, appointed in 1656 under desperate circumstances, who would restore something sharp and disciplined to the Ottoman machine. You notice the Sultan young, watchful, seated behind a carved screen, allowing his vizier to take the reins. The palace breathes differently under Köprülü influence. You see it in the kitchens, where excess is curtailed. You see it in the stables, where once silent grooms now scurry to meet exacting inspection. Even the scribes work faster, their ink lines growing neater with each day. One curious detail, you spot a list posted in the outer court gardens, names of idle officials removed from their posts. It's printed plainly in Turkish, without embellishment. A small crowd gathers around it daily, as if reading a weather report. Clear skies today. One jokes, but storms for the idle. And yet, this is no tyrant's reign. Köprülü Mehmed's reforms, though harsh, are remembered for reviving stability. He funds the navy, restores neglected fortresses, tightens tax systems. The court begins to function again smooth, precise, almost mechanical. There is a calm in its discipline, even if it lacks the warmth of earlier eras. Still, historians debate, did the Köprülü viziers truly serve the empire, or themselves, the dynasty that followed Mehmed's son, and successors held vast power, sometimes eclipsing the sultans themselves? Was this restoration, or quiet usurpation? In a quieter wing of the palace, you watch Mehmed Pasha pause beside a tiled fountain. He rinses his hands, then feeds crumbs to a bird waiting near the basin's edge. His face softens, briefly. Then he turns back to the corridors of power. The court adjusts around him. Ceremonies are trimmed down. Advisors speak less often, more carefully. And the empire, once spinning into luxury and distraction, begins to turn with a steadier rhythm. You pass a room where ledgers are stacked from floor to ceiling grain quotas, ship manifests, regional budgets. You run your finger along one dusty spine and find an entry on soap taxes in Damascus. Nothing is overlooked. Later that evening, you sit in the outer garden with a few retired scribes, sipping a thin broth of chickpeas and lemon. One of them recalls how, under Mehmed, no one was too important to be questioned. Even the ink was nervous, he says with a grin. As twilight folds over the palace, oil lamps are lit in precise intervals. You walk through a corridor where the walls are bare. No murals, no mosaics. Just clean plaster, like a monk's cell, and yet you feel no absence. The silence here is its own ornament. You settle beneath a tree planted by Mehmed himself. Its leaves narrow, waxy, sharp-edged. It bears no fruit, only shade. But that, perhaps, is the point. And in that shade, the court breathes quietly, efficiently, almost peacefully. You awaken with the distant toll of cathedral bells and the thrum of hooves on foreign soil. The empire stirs beyond its comfortable borders, and the court braces itself for echoes of ambition. It is 1683, and you are far from the soft courtyards of Istanbul. You stand instead near the outskirts of Vienna, where tents stretch like a silken ocean, and the Ottoman army has encircled the city in one of the largest sieges ever undertaken by the empire. Here, the court has travelled with the campaign. The Sultan remains in Edirne, but his viziers and military elite have set up a mobile court among the hills and valleys surrounding Vienna. Silk cushions rest beside powder barrels. Coffee is poured beside maps drawn in haste. The boundary between war and governance is blurred by dust and cannon smoke. At the heart of this encampment is Grand Vizier Kah Mustafa Pasha. You catch sight of him in his command tent, robed in green and gold, fingers resting on a jewelled dagger, gaze fixed on the horizon. His voice is low, steady, persuasive. Some say he dreams not just of victory, but of conquest that will make him immortal. You move quietly between tents. Here, a muezzin calls the faithful to prayer. There, soldiers sharpen their blades and eat lentils with wooden spoons. One tunes a saz, humming a folk tune from Anatolia. You realise this army is not just Ottoman. It is a mosaic of peoples: Albanians, Bosnians, Turks, Arabs, Kurds. Each has brought a piece of home to this foreign plain. You notice a small, strange detail in the vizier's tent, an ornate porcelain coffee set from Istanbul, carried hundreds of miles for ceremonial use. He insists on serving dignitaries himself, especially European captives, to demonstrate Ottoman grace. Power, he tells one prisoner, is in small things. Still, anxiety builds. The siege drags on, supplies thin, morale teeters, and soon history pivots. On September the 12th, thus 1683, a combined army of Polish, Austrian, and German forces arrives to break the siege. The battle is swift, chaotic, and decisive. Ottoman troops are forced to retreat, their hopes of European expansion collapsing with them. You do not hear the clash of weapons, but you feel the silence that follows. The court retreats in shame. In Istanbul, the news arrives days later. The palace grows quiet, lanterns are dimmed, Kara Mustafa is summoned back disgraced. You pass scribes rewriting records, reducing the grandeur of the campaign to spare embarrassment. A logistical setback, one murmurs, not a failure. But in truth, the loss at Vienna marks the end of Ottoman territorial expansion into Europe, a turning point. The court will continue, yes, but now more inwardly, more cautiously. Historians still debate what caused the failure. Was it arrogance, tactical missteps, or simply bad luck and better prepared defenders? Some blame Kara Mustafa for refusing to wait for reinforcements. Others suggest the siege itself was too ambitious, too far from supply lines, too close to winter. Back at the palace, life returns to routine. The Sultan appears in public processions, smiling thinly. New buildings rise, gardens bloom, but beneath the splendour, something subtle shifts a caution, a humility, a memory of Vienna carried like an invisible scar. And yet, daily rhythms resume. You sit in the Imperial Library, watching a court historian annotate a map. He pauses at the mark for Vienna, then moves on without comment. In the gardens, the breeze carries the scent of saffron and turning leaves. A servant offers you quince preserves. The empire still feeds its people, still teaches, still sings. But now the songs are softer, more reflective. You settle beside the palace walls as dusk falls, your shadow stretching long across the cobblestones. Far away, Vienna's towers still stand, and here the Ottoman court exhales, humbled, but not broken. You close your eyes beneath a canopy of fig leaves and let the memories of ambition drift away like smoke. You awaken in a field of soft colour and ordered joy. All around you, tulips bloom red, yellow, lilac, even near black, each one swaying gently in the spring breeze. You're no longer in the tense court of Kara Mustafa or the sober chambers of reform. You're in the tulip era, a moment of levity and aesthetic delight within the vast arc of Ottoman rule. It is the early 18th century, and the court of Sultan Ahmed III is enjoying something rare peace. The palace has grown gentler in its expression. Art, literature, and flowers fill its hallways with a sense of mild exuberance. You stroll past courtiers lounging on divans covered in silk brocade, sipping cool sherbets made from rose petals and violet syrup. A poet reads aloud beneath a cypress tree. His verse is not of war or conquest, but of gardens and longing. The Sultan himself is fond of poetry. He writes under the pen name Nekib. You glimpse him from across the courtyard, nodding to musicians performing a gentle tune on ney and kanun. His kaftan, pale green and patterned with tiny tulips, seems almost too light for a ruler. But that is the mood now, lightness. The court moves in rhythm with celebration. Lantern festivals float on the Bosphorus at night. Small wooden boats glide silently across the water, each one carrying candles shaped like flowers. You watch reflections dance across the palace walls. A girl nearby claps once in delight, then cups her hands around the flame to shield it from the wind. One delightful detail you encounter is a set of ceramic tulip vases, tall, slender, and built with multiple thin necks so each stem can stand alone. These were commissioned in great numbers, placed in palace windows to catch the morning sun. You watch a servant carefully rearrange one, as though every tulip must face exactly the right direction to please the court. And yet, even in this dreamlike calm, tensions brew beneath the surface. Some members of the elite are uneasy with the court's indulgences. Critics murmur about extravagance. about detachment from the common people. They speak in cautious tones at night over less gilded tables, about the empire's declining military edge, about French fashions creeping into court wardrobes, about whether the tulips are blooming too brightly. Historians still debate this period's meaning. Was the tulip era a decadent lull before decline, or a cultural renaissance cut short by fear of change? Some say the court, during this time, opened windows to the west. Others say it turned inward, cloaking decay in beauty. You wander into the library pavilion, built in Ottoman Baroque, a swirl of east and west in marble and paint. Inside, an artist carefully illustrates a book of birds, peacocks, hoopoes, falcons. The colours are vivid, the outlines tender. Even the margins are filled with tiny tulips. Mehmed III, you learn, has begun diplomatic relations with France. Embassies are exchanged. Istanbul now welcomes foreign fashions, printing presses, new manners of thought. One evening, a visiting Frenchman marvels at the palace's perfumes and pastries. He will later write, "I have seen the Orient not as wild, but as noble, fragrant and precise." And it is true. The court, for all its flaws, is fragrant and precise. The musicians practice until the intervals are seamless. The tulips are trimmed to uniform height. Even the sherbet is served in tiers lemon, cherry, rose. At sunset, you rest on a cushion in the tulip garden itself, watching butterflies hover over the blooms. The air is warm with laughter and oud music. For a moment, you wonder, can this last? You close your eyes. You do not hear cannon fire or court intrigue. Only the hush of silk robes, the laughter of poets, the soft pop of tulips opening toward the sun, and in the twilight, the empire glows like a lantern on the Bosphorus gentle, flickering, beautiful. You awaken in a room that smells of starch and cologne, where uniforms hang in tidy rows and mirrors gleam beside freshly oiled sabres. The age of robes and turbans has not ended, but it is shifting slowly, irrevocably. It is the early 19th century, and Sultan Mahmud II is quietly at work, reshaping the court not with poetry or pageantry, but with scissors, boots, and bureaucracy. You walk the marble hallways of the imperial palace and notice at once the janissaries are gone. The silence where their presence once echoed is startling. Just a few years earlier, in 1826, Mahmud dismantled the corps entirely. The auspicious incident, they called it, when the Sultan ordered their barracks shelled, their ranks scattered, their name erased, an old pillar of the court, gone. Now, in its place a new army, European style, tailored jackets, brass buttons, brimmed hats. You observe recruits drilling in the courtyard in neat formation, their boots rising and falling in precise rhythm. Their rifles gleam under the sun. The air smells not of incense, but of gun oil and chalk. Mahmud himself is in his study, dressed in Western garb, a long black coat over white linen, and most strikingly a trimmed moustache with no beard. You hear a whisper from a court attendant he shaves daily, like a Parisian. It's said his image was printed widely across the empire, the first sultan to circulate his portrait publicly. One odd detail is tailored uniforms were sometimes made in secret chambers of the palace. Some tailors, nervous about tradition, stitched them behind closed curtains. Change, here, moves both boldly and cautiously. You visit the reformed ministries. Rows of clerks copy decrees in Ottoman Turkish, written with a renewed hand-still calligraphic, but with European punctuation creeping in. The court has acquired a new vocabulary budget. census, officer, postal route. You run your fingers across a fresh decree pressed with Mahmud's imperial tukhra. The ink is still wet, yet scholars still debate Mahmud's motivations. Was his reform a genuine modernisation of the empire or a desperate grasp for control amid encroaching European powers? Did he clear out the Janissaries for the sake of progress, or simply because they were no longer loyal? You pass through the Enderan school, now outfitted with desks and maps of the world that include railways and telegraph lines. A teacher instructs young boys on geography using a globe that includes North America unthinkable in earlier courts. The boys recite not just verses from the Quran, but dates of European wars and definitions of diplomacy. A chamberlain shows you a letter received from London, a proposal for naval cooperation. It lies beside one from Mecca, reporting on the state of pilgrims, east and west, spiritual and strategic, swirl together now in the inbox of empire, and the palace reflects this blend. Old Ottoman arabesques remain on the ceilings, but the walls now carry hints of European wallpaper. Some rooms even have clocks ticking softly in the corners, a novelty still, their ticking precise and unnerving. You pause near a wide window where a servant pours thick black coffee beside a guest from Vienna. They converse in a blend of French and Ottoman, struggling but smiling. The court is learning to speak new languages linguistically and politically. Outside, the Bosphorus glitters, lined with new stone buildings. Ferries cut through the water like blades. In the gardens, old Janissary drill fields are now orchards, and courtiers take tea beside trellises of climbing roses. Mahmud walks through them in silence, nodding once at the guards in western caps. His court is quieter now, more administrative, less theatrical. But beneath the stillness is determination reform etched into bone. You sit beside a marble fountain and sip water from a copper cup. Change is not loud here. It seeps in like morning light through the shutters. And tonight, you sleep in a court that no longer looks entirely east, nor west, but forward. You awaken beneath the low golden glow of gas lamps flickering softly along the corridor of a ministry building, not a palace chamber. The Ottoman court has changed again. It is the mid-19th century, and you are now in the heart of the Tanzimat era, a time when reform isn't whispered from behind a veil or passed through eunuchs in the harem, but drafted in offices lined with bookshelves and legal codes. The empire is trying to modernize itself into survival. You stroll slowly through the Babi Ali, the Sublime Port, now the central axis of Ottoman administration. This is where edicts are issued, ambassadors received, and the pulse of policy beats in Ottoman Turkish, blended with legal French and translated back again. The hallways echo with the sound of fountain pens scratching across parchment, interrupted only by the occasional clink of teacups on brass saucers. This court drinks tea now, not just coffee, a quieter ritual, but just as serious. You glance inside a room where young scribes, wearing fezzes and pressed jackets, are studying legal texts. They're revising the penal code, not just copying it, debating it, modernizing it. Across the hall, a group discusses telegraph lines between Istanbul and Baghdad. There is a blueprint pinned to the wall, curling slightly at the corners. The Sultan at this time, Abdülmecidi, is gentle, idealistic. You catch sight of him standing in the Dolmabahce Palace, a newly constructed European-style royal residence that replaces Topkapı's introspective charm with chandeliers, grand staircases, and ballrooms. Crystal balustrades reflect candlelight in 1,000 tiny fires. The court dances now, occasionally. Ambassadors twirl in Austrian waltzes. Ministers nod politely while plotting reforms. A small, charming detail Abdulmecid was known to sketch on scrap paper between meetings: small ships, birds, even caricatures of his viziers. One survives, faint and funny, showing a long-nosed official with a pile of books balanced on his turban. You pass through the Imperial Council chamber, where ministers sit with polished shoes and foreign advisors lean in, whispering through translators. No one wears swords anymore. The court wields pens and treaties. The reforms come fast and layered. Equal rights for non-Muslims, secular courts, a national anthem. The creation of Ottoman citizenship regardless of religion, something new, daring, controversial. Many in the older court grumble. "We are becoming too French," one mutters under his breath. Yet another, sipping tea beside a barometer, counters. "We are becoming what we must." Historians continue to debate the Tanzimat. Did it delay collapse or hasten it by awakening tensions? Did the court's westernization alienate its citizens or offer them a vision of shared modernity? You see both in motion. Outside the port, protests begin to stir. With austere reforms continue to stack, heavy and necessary. Later, you visit a school newly open to Christian and Muslim boys alike. The teacher, proud and nervous, points out a blackboard etched with arithmetic. In the courtyard, 2 boys, 1 Armenian, 1 Turkish argue about who can run fastest to the garden wall. You watch them dash away, laughing. Back in Dolmabahce, you find the Sultan's music room. He was fond of the piano, and you catch the final notes of a Chopin nocturne, played gently by a court musician. Above, the chandelier sways slightly with the breeze from the open Bosphorus windows. And yet, for all its grace, the new court is more fragile. Dolmabahce costs money. Reform costs stability. And the empire must now borrow first from within, then from Europe. Still, tonight, you sit on a carved divan beneath gaslight, tea warm in your hands, and listen to the sounds of a new kind of empire, one of code and conversation, hope and hesitation. The whispers of the old court are fainter now, but they have not vanished. They wait behind every curtain of velvet, behind every foreign phrase uttered with careful pride. And as you rest your head against the wall of this half-European, half-Ottoman world, the flicker of a lamp beside you echoes the flicker of possibility. You awaken to the sound of shuffled papers and sanded wood, of inkpots clinking gently in quiet hands. You're not in a palace wing or a tiled courtyard, but in the humming heart of a bureaucracy, a palace not of gold, but of paperwork. This is the Ottoman Court of the late 19th century, now recentered around files, files, and more files. The Sultan is Abdülhamid III, and although Topkapı still stands and Dolmabahce still dazzles, real power resides in rooms lined with ledgers and sealed envelopes. You sit in the central archive room of the Yıldız Palace, where the desks are orderly, the clocks all synchronized, and a quiet tension clings to the air like tobacco smoke. Every day, the Sultan reads dozens, sometimes hundreds of petitions. Nothing escapes his gaze. Requests for rail lines, for schooling, for pardons, reports from spies, updates from governors. He marks them with a blue pencil, always personally. You follow a court clerk as he moves from room to room, delivering documents with the reverence of sacred scrolls. This court, above all, is about information. Abdülhamid, seated behind a modest writing desk rather than a grand throne, works deep into the night. You catch a glimpse of him reviewing an atlas by lamplight, making careful notes about the empire's shifting borders. He seldom hosts lavish receptions. He prefers control, consistency, and knowing more than anyone else in the room. One curious detail: the Sultan had thousands of photographs taken of cities, landscapes, and people across the empire. Not for art, but for surveillance, understanding, curiosity. You leaf through a few of these. A caravan in the Syrian desert, a Jewish school in Salonika, a railway bridge in the Balkans. Each image is a window into places Abdulhamid may never visit, but knows deeply. You visit the telegraph office, now a central node in the palace's communication web. Operators tap rapidly, relaying messages to distant provinces. One misheard click could change the day's policy. There is an almost sacred silence in the room, interrupted only by the staccato hum of Morse code. Outside, the Yıldız gardens remain well kept, but simpler. Gone are the extravagant lantern festivals of Mehmed VI. In their place controlled strolls, small fountains, chess played beneath quiet trees. The Sultan walks there, guarded, thoughtful, always alert. Still, not everyone loves this new court of careful steps. Critics call it paranoid, secretive, oppressive. Spies and informants are everywhere. A janitor might be watching. A servant might be listening. Some historians describe it as a velvet cage palace without pageantry. And yet, others argue that Abdulhamid held the empire together during its most vulnerable period. The great powers of Europe are circling, now hungry for influence, eager to draw lines through Ottoman lands. The Sultan's bureaucracy becomes a defensive shield, a nervous but functioning machine. Inside the palace's printing press chamber, editors prepare issues of Takvimi Vekayi, the official newspaper. The headlines are cautious, the font consistent, the empire's story, now shaped in print more than proclamation. You listen as court officials debate infrastructure plans, railways to connect the Hijaz, schools for engineering and medicine, teacher colleges for girls. There is reform here, quiet, pragmatic, careful, not for display, but for resilience. One clerk jokes softly, "We write more than we build these days." Another responds, "But paper holds longer than stone." Evening falls, and you follow a librarian into the Sultan's private collection. Books from Paris, London, Delhi, Cairo, margins marked with neat blue annotations. Here, too. Abdulhamid gathers knowledge like a fortress around him. He rules with pens and paper weights. You retire to a simple room near the outer garden, where a desk and candle wait for no one in particular. The walls are plain, the silence restful. This court does not dazzle. It remembers. It watches. It adjusts. And as you drift asleep, you can almost hear the rustle of parchment in the next room, the empire's fate being decided word by word. You awaken in a room thick with velvet curtains, heavy with memory, and faintly echoing with the creak of footsteps pacing just out of view. The Yıldız Palace is quieter now, too quiet. You're still in the reign of Abdulhamid II, but the atmosphere has changed. The documents still flow, the telegraphs still click, but the walls feel tighter, and every glance seems overlong. This is the twilight of a ruler who once controlled everything by knowing everything, and now he knows too much. You walk through a corridor lined with painted portraits not of sultans, but of European monarchs and Ottoman scholars, an odd gallery of faces chosen not for loyalty, but perhaps for warning. Some eyes seem to follow you. Abdulhamid has retreated further into isolation. His court has become a hall of mirrors, reflections of loyalty, doubt, caution. Only the most trusted advisors remain close. Everyone else communicates in layers of protocol, of distance, of veiled phrases. One detail speaks volumes. The Sultan now orders that certain rooms be locked behind him, even when unoccupied. He fears intrusions not just from enemies, but from ideas. Even words can become threats. Still, the court continues to function, though more mechanically than gracefully. The Sultan's intelligence network is vast. You sit beside a clerk who copies out a report from Thessaloniki about a group of young army officers gathering in private rooms, reading French political tracts. The Young Turks, they're called, but only in whispers. You walk into one of the palace's more unexpected rooms, a private photography studio. Abdulhamid, fascinated by the medium, still arranges for portraits of himself, his children, landscapes he will never see. One photograph lies unfinished on a table, a shot of the Hijaz Railway, one of his proudest achievements. The railway, like the court, connects far-flung provinces in silence, but outside the empire shifts. Nationalist movements stir in the Balkans. Foreign powers lean harder, and inside the court, the Young Turks become more than an idea. Some historians argue Abdulhamid saw it coming, that he knew the days of absolute rule were numbered. Others suggest he believed his network of loyalists would hold the seams together, but in 1908 the seams rupture. You awaken again in the very same palace, but everything feels different. There has been a coup, peaceful but pointed. The Young Turks, led by reform-minded officers and bureaucrats, have demanded the restoration of the constitution that Abdulhamid had suspended decades earlier. And remarkably, the Sultan agrees. A parliament is re-established. The press blooms overnight. The court's grip slackens, but it is short-lived. In 1909, a counter-coup erupts, then fails, and the Sultan, once the unquestioned voice of empire, is removed by his own ministers. Abdulhamid is escorted through the same gates he once entered in triumph. You stand among the onlookers. He does not weep. He walks with dignity, but his face is unreadable, his thoughts locked behind decades of paper and silence. He is exiled to Salonika. A quirky, tender note survives from that period during exile. He continued to care for his pet parrots. He reportedly fed them himself and spoke to them in Turkish and Arabic. After all the councils and courts, it was their company he chose. You remain at Yildiz Palace, now strangely hollow. The court has not vanished, but its heart has been changed. Ministers now meet under electric lights. The Sultan's seal is replaced by parliamentary decrees. New flags are unfurled beside old ones, and you sit on a bench beneath a still-trimmed garden archway, wondering how silence and surveillance once held so much sway, and how, with a shift of the wind, they slipped into memory. You lie back, the scent of dry paper and spring roses mixing in the evening air, and you sleep beside the ghost of a court that knew too much and trusted too little. You awaken in a room hazy with cigarette smoke and the scent of ink still drying on political pamphlets. The court has not vanished, but it no longer belongs solely to sultans and scribes. You are now within the parliament building in Istanbul, a structure that hums with new urgency. It is 1910, and the empire is under the control of a different kind of power ideas. The young Turks, now ascendant, have seized the machinery of government. Officially, Sultan Mehmed V sits upon the throne, but you quickly learn he reigns. He does not rule. You sit in the gallery of the Meclisi Mebusan, the Ottoman Parliament, and watch the debate unfold. Young men with neat moustaches and clipped accents argue over tax policy, military reform, language rights. One shouts, another replies with a Latin quote. Laughter follows. This is not the quiet, incense-scented court of previous centuries. This is loud, lit, and restless. You make your way to the office of a reformist minister. He offers you a seat, then pours tea into mismatched porcelain cups. Behind him, a map of the empire dotted with thumbtacks. We are trying, he says softly, to hold a body together with bandages of law. You walk the city now, not just the court, and you feel the empire's splintering edges. Posters in Greek, Armenian, Ladino, and Turkish share space on cracked walls. In cafes, debates break out between merchants, students, officers. Equality says one, order says another. You sip sweetened coffee as a violinist tunes her instrument by the window, unaware of the rhetoric swirling around her. Back at the palace, the Sultan walks his courtyard slowly, flanked by aides who speak more to each other than to him. He is kind, dignified, but a figure of ceremony, like a shadow stitched to a moving wall. You see him greet school children. They bow awkwardly. One whispers, "Is that really the Sultan?" His smile is soft. "Just an old man," he says, "in an old house." A curious touch, a room within Dolmabahce has been set aside for international newspapers, neatly filed in French, German, Russian, even Japanese. The court now reads the world like a scholar reads scripture, trying to guess what tomorrow might want. Historians still debate the young Turks' intentions. Did they seek liberal reform and progress, or did their nationalism turn swiftly inward, excluding the very diversity they once claimed to represent? The answer, like so much in Ottoman history, is layered both hopeful and fraught. You attend a quiet poetry reading in a salon near Galata, hosted by intellectuals who still dream of a pluralistic empire. The verses float gently, tinged with melancholy. "We are a mosaic," one poet says, but someone keeps shaking the table. Later that evening, you wander through the Galata port, watching the lights of foreign ships blink on the water. Goods still arrive, music still plays in taverns, but the empire is tense now, no longer steady, no longer grand. It has become something more fragile, and perhaps more human. Back at the Parliament, a vote passes narrowly new education reforms. Applause breaks out, but a whisper follows, too late. You see the concern on their faces. The Balkans are restless. The provinces ask questions the capital no longer knows how to answer. You sit on the steps outside, beside a guard who reads quietly from a French novel. He does not look up. He only says, "Do you think they know this is ending?" You breathe in the Istanbul air, thick with clove smoke, salt, and change. And as the stars emerge above the Bosphorus, you sleep to the sound of arguments fading into silence, of hope curving gently into doubt. You awaken to the rustle of paper ballots and the hushed murmur of veiled voices stepping carefully through marble corridors. It is the second decade of the 20th century. The Ottoman Court, if it can still be called that, is undergoing yet another shift, this time from within. The empire is waning. But something new stirs in the heart of the old voices, long silenced, are beginning to speak, and many of them belong to women. You're in a quiet wing of the capital, not far from the sublime port, where a small gathering is taking place, one that would have been unthinkable a generation ago. Ottoman women, educated and articulate, are discussing public life. They're not part of the court in its classical sense, but their influence now slips into the layers once closed to them. One wears a lavender scarf pinned with a delicate brooch. Another, in spectacles and a heavy wool jacket, speaks softly of education reforms. A third reads from a handwritten manifesto, carefully phrased, deferential in tone, but unmistakable in intent. The room smells faintly of ink, rose water, and the nervous excitement of first steps. You learn that women's magazines, yes, plural now, circulate in Istanbul. They feature essays, poems, political reflections, and debates on marriage, schooling, even suffrage. Kadınlar Dünyası Women's World publishes bold ideas wrapped in polite language. Some pieces call for full political equality. Others urge cautious reform, but all insist women are citizens, not ornaments. One quirky detail strikes you among the reformers is a former palace servant turned writer, who once embroidered curtains for the harem and now pens columns about industrial training for girls. Needles teach patience, she says, but we must also teach how to hold a pen. Within the imperial court itself, change is more hesitant. Sultan Mehmed VI, aging and soft-spoken, rarely addresses these shifts. But some women of the palace, especially younger consorts and princesses, have taken notice. You observe one reading aloud from a French novel in the royal garden, then laughing quietly at the idea of a queen with a vote. Still, this new openness is not without controversy. Many male officials warn against importing chaos from Europe. Others, especially among the young Turks, see the value of educated mothers in building a stronger nation, but resist full inclusion. Historians remain divided. Did the court's reforms truly empower women, or were they symbolic gestures made in the empire's twilight? Was this inclusion, or simply another kind of control? You attend a small musical performance later that day, hosted in a former salon of the harem now repurposed for education. Girls in pressed uniforms play the kanun and recite poetry about the Bosphorus. One young woman, barely 20, speaks of science and citizenship with a clarity that cuts through the room. Our empire is large, she says, but we have never mapped the minds of our daughters. In a side gallery, you spot a painting, an Ottoman lady beside an open window, a pen in hand, her gaze drifting towards ships on the water. The symbolism is soft but unmistakable. Evening comes quietly. You sit beside a stone fountain in the courtyard, watching lamps flicker behind half-drawn curtains. A young couple walks past, the woman in a deep blue shawl, her head uncovered. She carries a stack of books. He carries a violin. You close your eyes to the gentle rhythm of distant footsteps on tiled floors, of pens scratching paper, of voices rising just high enough to be heard, and you sleep as the empire begins, at last, to hear those who had long whispered from the margins. You awaken to the clink of cutlery on porcelain, to the faint sound of violins tuning in another room, and to a stillness in the air that feels final. You are at the last supper of an empire. It is 1922, and Sultan Mehmed VI sits alone at a long table in Dolmabahce Palace, surrounded not by viziers or courtiers, but by silence. His posture is upright, his kaftan perfectly pressed, his boots shine to a dull gleam, but the empire is already dissolving around him like steam curling off his untouched meal. You take a seat at the edge of the room, quietly observing. There is no feast tonight, just a modest spread roasted eggplant, warm bread, olives, a small bowl of soup, the sort of meal one might eat alone in contemplation rather than celebration. Mehmet VI stares out across the Bosphorus through tall glass windows. The view hasn't changed. The empire has... A staff member steps in to pour water, bowing almost too deeply. The Sultan nods, but says nothing. These are no longer the bustling days of Topkapı or the reform-driven swirl of the Tanzimat. This is the end of the Ottoman Court as it has existed for over 6 centuries. One tender, almost strange detail next to the Sultan's dinner plate rests a framed photograph sepia-toned and slightly faded of his father, Sultan Abdülmecid, and a younger version of himself in full ceremonial garb. A reminder, perhaps, that this lineage was once thought unbreakable. You walk slowly through the palace halls as the Sultan dines, noticing the subtle marks of absence missing tapestries, furniture covered in linen, grand clocks that no longer tick, staff have been reduced, rooms closed. The scent of lemon polish remains, but the echo of footsteps has changed. Earlier that day, the Turkish Grand National Assembly in Ankara had formally abolished the Sultanate. The Caliphate will linger briefly, but Mehmed VI's role, his name, his seal, his lineage has been declared void. The empire, as a political body, is gone. Historians argue even now about that final decision. Was the court's fall inevitable? The price of too late reforms and too long resistance to change? Or was it swept away by new forces it could never have anticipated? Republicanism, nationalism, the trauma of war. Could the Sultan have saved anything, or had history simply moved on? You descend the grand staircase later that night, where 2 guards stand not in vigilance but in formality. There is no threat now, only departure. A low hum draws you outside, to the docks where a British warship waits quietly in the dark. The Sultan will board it in the morning, his exile arranged in a gesture of faded dignity. You stand among a few silent witnesses as palace staff carry his luggage to the water's edge. No crowd gathers, no fanfare plays, only the rustle of the sea and the tired cry of gulls. And yet, in the shadows, you notice something strangely poignant. A small boy, perhaps the child of a servant, holding a Turkish flag in one hand and toy boat in the other. He doesn't wave either. He just watches. You return once more to the Sultan's table. His meal is finished, though he's eaten very little. He folds a linen napkin carefully and lays it beside the plate. For a moment, he closes his eyes, listening to the Bosphorus as it laps gently against the stones outside. A servant approaches and whispers something. The Sultan stands. He walks slowly, deliberately, his steps echoing like a punctuation mark on centuries of rule, and you remain behind in the stillness, where the memory of the Ottoman Court lingers like candle smoke soft, fading, yet impossible to forget. You awaken one final time beside the Bosphorus, where mist floats like a veil over the water and the faint light of dawn begins to soften the tiled rooftops of Istanbul. The empire is gone. It is 1924 now, and the last echo of the Ottoman Court, the Caliphate, has just been abolished. What was once a world of viziers and velvet, of imperial gardens and golden decrees, has faded into memory. The court, once the sun around which provinces revolved, is now a closed chapter in the city's long and intricate story. You sit on a wooden bench near Topkapı Palace, the oldest home of the sultans. Its gates are still there, its walls still adorned with floral tilework. But the crowds that once gathered to glimpse the sultan's procession now walk past it like tourists in a silent museum. The palace is open to the public now. You enter quietly, as if visiting a sleeping relative. Inside, you walk through empty halls that once buzzed with ceremony, the divan chamber, the harem, the library where scribes once debated over the spacing of letters. Sunlight filters through stained glass windows. You see no officials, no servants, only caretakers dusting marble pedestals. The air carries a reverent hush. You pause beside the imperial treasury. Jewels rest under glass, their brilliance dimmed by stillness. The sword of Osman lies in silence, its blade catching no light. And in the courtyard beyond, pigeons gather where soldiers once stood in formation. Outside the palace, the Republic has risen. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk's government has proclaimed a new order, secular, parliamentary, modern. Fezzes are banned, Arabic script is replaced with Latin, madrasas are shuttered. The Turkish identity is being rewritten from top to bottom, and the palace is no longer part of its active vocabulary. You pass through Istanbul's winding streets, where the past peeks around every corner. You see an old man reciting Ottoman poetry beneath a lamppost, ignored by passers-by. A young girl reads a modern textbook at a tram stop, the Sultanate reduced to a chapter heading. And yet, the memory of the court lingers. One final quirky note in a quiet bookstore tucked near the Grand Bazaar. You find a notebook for sale. Inside are sketches of palace floor plans drawn from memory by a former palace guard, now retired and forgotten. The notes are in Ottoman Turkish, beautiful and unreadable to most. But the lines, the careful curves, they're a kind of love letter to a vanished world. Historians still debate what the Ottoman Court truly meant. Was it the glorious centre of a vast multicultural empire, a burden of tradition, a mirror of Islamic monarchy at its most refined, or something else, entirely, a theatre, a memory, a mirror held up to time itself? You return once more to the Bosphorus, watching the morning light stretch across the water. The gulls cry, the ferries hum, and the city breathes without its crown. Yet Istanbul remains layered, patient, still stitched with imperial memory. You sit beneath a fig tree that might have once shaded a concubine or a clerk or a poet. You close your eyes, and you dream not of empire or conquest, but of courtyards at dawn, of calligraphy curling like smoke, of slippers on stone and the softest whispers behind golden screens. The court is gone, but its echoes still float gently through the breeze. And now, dear listener, your journey through the courtly age of the Ottoman Empire is complete. From the flickering torchlight of Osman's tent to the final candlelight of Dolmabahce, from whispered dreams of conquest to the slow, quiet shuttering of palace doors, you've drifted through centuries of jasmine-scented courtyards, velvet-bound ledgers, and golden-tipped minarets. Let your mind return to the places we've walked together. The hush of a morning garden wet with dew and footsteps, the layered melodies of a knee flute drifting across the marble, the rustle of a robe in the shadow of a silk curtain, the pulse of an empire, not loud and clashing but rhythmic, steady, like the gentle rocking of the Bosphorus. As you rest now, know that history doesn't end, it lingers, like perfume on old fabric, like the final note of a lullaby. The Ottoman Court was many things: a keeper of tradition, a house of power, a sanctuary for thought, and eventually, a memory. But even now, beneath the modern skyline of Istanbul, its presence still hums softly, like the hush before dawn. Breathe deeply. Let the flickers of time settle into stillness. You're safe here, wrapped in centuries of stories. Let go, drift, and fall gently into sleep, carried by the quiet whispers of an empire that once was.